To be honest, is the pod going on? To be honest, sit down, we need to have a talk. Cornelius gon' make a point that the others don't. Them other shows sound the same, come escape the box. Expand your mind, dig into no controversial topics. He ain't scared to keep it real. Tune into this podcast, but don't be in your feelings. We gon' have a laugh, we gon' talk about some pain. Let's talk about the present situation of today. To be honest, is this the podcast? I need to tune in right now.
Everybody, what's up? Yo, this is your boy Cornelius, Lindsey. Super excited to have y'all back for another episode of To Be Honest. Y'all know this is the month of May. We're talking about mental health. I'm super excited because today I have a great speaker. I'm going to have an opportunity to sit down and talk with Derrick Roberts. He is a behavioral specialist, board certified. Now he gave me the initials for it, but I ain't gonna remember. I told him I don't remember. It's like BCAA or BB something. But he gonna be able to tell y'all exactly what it is. But we're gonna get into this conversation today. Derrick, you with me, brother?
I'm here, man. I'm here. Glad to be here.
Man, I'm super excited to just be having this conversation with you. Now, first off, introduce with your title because I know I jacked it up.
Yeah, man. So I'm a board certified behavior analyst, also known as a BCBA or a behavior analyst.
Okay.
Either.
Okay. Awesome. And when you say behavioral analyst, kind of go into a little bit about what that means and really what your specialty is.
Yeah. So my specialty lies within the field of behavior. What motivates people? What reinforces them? What are some socially significant behaviors that need to be modified in an individual? For the most part, I work with children who have varying diagnoses from autism, anxiety, ADHD. But anything in the mental health field is kind of my go-to. But specialty is definitely autism, children, pediatric mental health, and therapy.
Now, it's very interesting that you mentioned autism. So I was looking at a study. I don't know if it was about 2 days ago that was saying that it would seem that the cases of autism amongst children are increasing. But the article is giving two reasons as to why that could be. One of the reasons they said is that ultimately that nowadays children are being tested earlier than they were many years ago, which then gives the reason why the increase. And then some were saying, well, they really didn't know. That we don't really know as to why these cases are increasing. With somebody who has studied autism and knowing that, I mean, my wife and I alone, we know of families right now who have children who have been diagnosed on the autistic spectrum. Is there, from your study, do you have an answer to that? Why we see cases rising nowadays?
So I don't know if I have a direct answer as to why cases are rising. But I do know that there's more of an awareness of autism spectrum disorder. There's a greater prevalence among boys than girls. We have access to more research, to more studies, to provide diagnosis much sooner.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know exactly why there's a greater number or frequency or rate of the diagnosis now. But I do know that there is a less stigma around mental health in general,
mm-hmm.
But also more research available when it comes to diagnosing and assessments.
So with parents who typically, when they get that diagnosis, when they hear that, your child may be on this autistic spectrum, that usually comes with a great deal of fear. Great deal of dread, because they're like, when you look at your child, I look at my 3 babies and I'm like, I don't ever want to hear that something is necessarily, and I'm going to use this loosely, but I do want to use this, something is wrong with them.
Yeah.
So now that the stigma now that we're eradicating the stigma around mental health, especially around, mental disorders or whatever, however we want to call it, with these parents who are listening right now, what do you have to say to them that kind of calms their fears as it relates to autistic disorder or big kids being on the autistic scale?
Yeah. So before I jump into that, I'll give a little background. So I came into the field because I met a young man while I was in college. His name was Chip. He had a learning disability and also ASD, autism spectrum disorder. he was determined to get an education, to live a life that was independent, and to make the most out of his quote unquote situation. From there, I taught special education for a couple of years, and now I'm an actual clinician. And so at every point of my journey, I've always interacted with parents. I've always met parents who were filled with anxiety, filled with worry, and just not knowing what to do. Whether they just got a diagnosis, whether they were 3 years in, their kids are getting ready to go to school. But what I want parents to know is that you're not alone. And just because your son or daughter may have a diagnosis, that doesn't mean that they can't live a life that has great quality. It doesn't mean that they can't go to college and they can't be accomplished and, even live outside of the home. And, you even have parents who may have children who are nonverbal, who don't have functional communication. But I want you to know that that's okay. There's help out there. There's people who study and who want to help, and there's communities, and your child can be successful. So don't get in a rut thinking that you're alone. Your anxiety is normal. Your fear is normal. All of it is normal, and it's okay to have. I think it's a good indicator that you're probably on the right track to find help.
I love that. And I think the one thing that parents probably hearing that and giving the sense of encouragement they need is that they're not alone. Because I could not imagine, parents feeling like I'm by myself, especially when you get a diagnosis, like that. And you would assume that, hey, something's wrong with my kids, and are my kids different from their kids? And you start playing this comparison game. How long have you been in this field?
So let's see, 2013, so 2021.
I ain't good at math, so I ain't.
Yeah.
I love history. I love history and government in school. I didn't do well at math, so.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Criminal psychology.
You said what now?
My bachelor's in experimental psychology, and I got that in 2012, 11, somewhere around that. So it's been a while. Yeah.
That's awesome. So now one of the things that and I have to say this, I know this is kind of going off the side, but it's interesting because when in the field of mental health, in the field of therapy and, specialists and stuff like that, one thing that I have noticed, which I'm not in the field at all, but I have over the last year, I've kind of given my own self over to learning as much as I possibly can in the field. And one thing that I've noticed is that it's not a lot of Black men who are involved in the field. And one thing that I also have seen in many of the studies that I've looked at is that it's not a lot of Black men who are diagnosed with mental illness.
Yeah.
As a Black man who is in the mental health field, how do you feel about that? Do you feel as though that needs to change? And also, why do you feel as though many Black men have not been diagnosed with mental illness in relation to women, in relation to our white counterparts, so on and so forth?
Yeah. So, first, that's a very loaded question.
I know. That's why I asked you.
so where to start with this one? I think it has a lot to do with the stigma, number one, that surrounds mental health. And before we get into the stigma, I'm going to back up to another part of your question. You talked about there not being a lot of Black males who are in the field. Mm-hmm. So a little bit more specific with that. So when we look at psychologists, specific psychologists, 4% of psychologists are Black. And then when you dissect that a little bit further, 1.5 to 2% of those African American psychologists are men. So if you put 100 psychologists in a room and you looked around, only 1 to 2 of those psychologists would be Black men. Now, out of all those in the room, you probably have 5 to 6 women. But for every 100 white psychologists, there is 1 to 2 Black male psychologists. Mm-hmm. So that speaks to the number, how underrepresented we are in the field as Black men. Now, when it comes to men being, I don't want to say underdiagnosed, I think there's a lot of things that go into it. You have the stigma that surrounds mental health and being a man, and what that means to be a man in our society and even in our culture. Men, we have shame, we have guilt that inhibits us from being open and honest about our struggles and the things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. Our culture is known for toxic masculinity. Get up, don't cry, you'll be okay. It's the way that we're raised. We're taught to be quiet and suck it up. So men naturally are going to underreport signs of depression, anxiety, just like we underreport medical illnesses. For those of us who are married, sometimes we don't feel well. We don't even share it with our wives that we're not feeling well because, it affects itself. I'll go to the doctor, I'll be fine, and it'll all be good. I think it goes into like our mindset, number one, and then just our culture and the way that we were raised.
That's good. That's good. That's good. I feel like you was telling my life because my wife always asks me, she's like, how do you feel? And I say, I'm fine. I'm fine. Yeah. I mean, I don't go to the doctor. I don't go, I don't know the last time I had a physical, I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, but it's been a long time. I haven't had a physical in a while, but I do go to like a men's clinic, but I feel like that's a safer place than saying I go to the doctor because I've something happened to me. I'm like, I'll just bandage myself up and I'll keep going. But that makes a ton of sense that the reason why more men are underdiagnosed is because we necessarily have this process of shame with being in the field of behavior. Would I be off course in asking a question that has to deal with adults as well and not just children?
No, that's fine.
Awesome.
Okay.
So in the field of behavior, we're coming off of I guess you would say, I don't know if I'd be correct in saying we're at the ending of what was seemed to be a very severe pandemic.
Yeah.
Where people were shut inside of their homes, and many countries still are shut inside of their homes, limited in our physical contact with other people, especially socially. And now we're starting to see many marriages end in divorce. Most of the married people I know, either they did one or two things. Either they had a new baby, or they did three things. Either had a new baby, they got a dog, or they got a divorce. It was one of those three things.
Okay.
And so we're starting to see patterns. We're starting to see things that are happening that are kind of birthing out of this lockdown that we're in. So with someone who is a study of behavior, what are we seeing? What is the behavioral pattern of society right now?
Yeah. So I want to speak to what you said. We've been locked in. Our social engagement and communication in our life has literally been flipped upside down.
Right.
And you can look at anyone at any scope of life, no matter what your walk is, your life has been impacted in some way by the past year, the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So what we are seeing in the field now is increase in anxiety, increased depression. You're isolated from other people, so that communication that you're able to have and that open door policy you have with a friend, you may not be able to have it. You also have people dealing with grief and loss like never before, right? The results of the pandemic and the impact of the pandemic will last for years to come. And we're only at the beginning, in my opinion, of the mental and the social and the behavioral impacts of it. Because, now children who were born or children who were in the adolescent stage are only used to seeing people with a mask. Now they're removing this mask. You have people who are in different walks of life who were known for being able to do a whole list of things. And even, if we look even, sometimes at churches and preachers and pastors, they're used to pastoring, going to church every Sunday, being able to shepherd, lay hands, and do all these things with their flock. But now in the whip, it's just snatched away, right? So that impacts people from every point of life, and the things that gave you meaning and the things that gave you purpose are now gone. So people who are, as these macho men or these tough guys and who you could always go to for advice find themselves now needing the advice, needing the therapy and the place to say, hey, a year ago I was the man, I was on top of my world, and now all of a sudden it's gone. So we're seeing an increase in anxiety, an increase in just in mental health challenges across the board.
So in terms of behavior, you mentioned something. You said, "Hey, we're just getting started."
Yeah.
Anxiety. You mentioned two things: anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
So with this, I don't want to say newfound fear, but with this emerging sense of fear that we have right now in our world, in our society today, what kind of behavior do you think we can expect out of people as the years continue to go on with this anxiety that is kind of brewing right now in our society?
Yeah. So, behaviorally, what we likely would see is people who are, withdrawn, people who are not as apt to have social communication, initiating conversations, being able to have meaningful relationships in person. We were already a very tech-driven society before the pandemic, and now everything that we do is behind a camera. It's behind a cell phone, all these little dating apps. And so people are losing the ability to have strong interpersonal skills and to be able to walk, meet in person, and have a conversation. And now, if you just step away from that for a second, now, before the pandemic, those who had like social anxiety, they may have found it difficult to, "Hey, Cornelius, my name is Derrick, how's it going?" Or even just, see you at the grocery store and smile and say hello. That social anxiety is now magnified times 10. Right? That person may be afraid to leave the house. I'm scared to leave my house. I'm terrified. Maybe the pandemic isn't really over. I'll leave my house and I'll get sick. Or I'll leave my house and I'll see somebody that knows me. Or they may be hyper self-conscious. How does my hair look? How does this look? I can't leave the house. I feel ugly. All these intrusive thoughts and feelings that are connected to anxiety are just being like, they're just being, I can't find the word for it, but it's coming to the forefront. And I don't think it's an emergence. I think it's a greater awareness, because sometimes when you find yourself in isolation or you find yourself not in your typical routine, you become more aware of the things within that you were able to ignore and hide behind prior to.
Jesus. So is there a remedy for this? Yeah,
I mean, just like there's a remedy for cancer, high blood pressure, anything else, there's a remedy for mental health challenges. Mm-hmm. So what I believe we have to first do is we have to give mental illness the same gravity or the same respect that we give medical illness. Mm-hmm. It's the same, just because someone suffers with depression doesn't mean that there's a personal or character flaw with this person. When you see someone who has, high blood pressure or sugar diabetes, you don't look at that person's character and say something's wrong with them. And it's a part of our day to day. When someone says, like we talked about earlier, "I'm going to the doctor," what's the first thing to say? "What's wrong?" Yeah. Right? Yeah. We wait till something's wrong to go to the doctor. Why don't we make it routine? "Hey, I'm just getting a routine physical. Nothing's wrong. I'm going to the doctor." We wait till we have marital problems or we have, social anxiety or depression to go seek help. But what about preventative care for mental illness? We have preventative care for medical illness. But I think we have to reduce the stigma by leveling the playing field between medical and mental illness.
Mm-hmm. So would you also say, looking at behavioral patterns amongst kids and also amongst adults, mm-hmm. would you see, because you mentioned earlier, you're talking about these kids in their adolescence who are accustomed to seeing people with masks on, and now, future mask off. So now with the masks that are coming off, these kids are being exposed to something that's completely different. So what do you see? I mean, we kind of talked about the adults here, but what do you see amongst children? And we got children who are sitting inside of schools who are wearing masks. And now, it's like they're having a completely different experience than what I had. I mean, some of these kids are sitting inside of their classroom. They have on masks. They also have plexiglass that is like next to them. I mean, some kids I've seen in some areas, they're in like tents. And they're having a completely different experience than what we had growing up. So now with these kids that are getting older and growing up, what kind of behavior can we expect out of them?
So I want to talk about that for a second. All right. So you have kids who are some of them born before the pandemic and old enough to somewhat understand what's going on. You know, they go to school. Typically, it's just a normal day. Now I have to wear a mask. I'm sitting behind plexiglass. My lunch is delivered to me in my classroom. I can't even go to PE with my classmates, right? This is traumatizing. It is difficult for someone of that age to fully understand like what is going on. Like I don't fully understand. My parents are saying there's a virus. People are getting sick. However, I just want to hang out with my friends. I just wanted to have a 13th birthday, you know, but now I can't have these things. So in my experience, I reference something called the cognitive triangle, right? So my feelings affect my behavior, and my behavior affects my thoughts, and how I think about myself affects my feelings. It's a triangle that never ends. So you have this kid in the classroom who is experiencing thoughts and feelings, and these thoughts and feelings are naturally going to impact their behavior. So kids with developmental delays, right? They don't have communication to express that, hey, I hate this. I just want to be able to say what you see aggression, right? You see some property destruction. You see typical developing kids lashing out at their parents. And a lot of times it's misguided anger. They're not necessarily mad at their parents. But they don't fully understand. Mom and dad are telling me to stay in the house because it's not safe. But all I see is I want to do me, right? So we're having some behavioral responses at home. Kids, you know, as we say in our culture, talking back, are giving lip to their parents. We have kids sneaking out of the house. You know, we've all been there, we've all done it. But you're seeing a lot of behavioral responses, some that are normal, right? Some that are out of the norm. You're even seeing some mental health challenges emerge or awareness, you know, greater anxiety. You know, the kid who was, you know, already shy, now he's an introvert. They're pulled out, have the option to go to school at home. But what happens in the fall when we're all back in school? And this kid who maybe had social anxiety or was shy is now put back in that school environment. That's what I mean by we're just at the beginning.
Ooh, Jesus. Would you consider it child abuse?
No, I wouldn't consider it child abuse for this reason. You look at child abuse, you're looking at something that is meant to cause harm, that causes harm, right? The intent of what parents are doing, the majority of parents, to what I know, is to protect their child. Now, does it traumatize their children? For some of them, yeah, because they don't fully understand it. But I wouldn't call it child abuse.
Would we put this on the parents? Would we put this on the teachers? I mean, I won't even, I said that wrong. Not the parents, not the teachers, but ultimately those who are empowered that impose the laws. So I'm not, in this, I'm not saying that the parents are abusing their kids, because the parents are ultimately following the guidelines that the school ultimately lays out. The teachers are following the guidelines that are ultimately implemented by the school. The school is ultimately following the guidelines that is implemented by its local governmental officials. So, I mean, in no way am I saying that parents are abusive, the teachers are abusive, or even the school system itself is abusive. And, you know, and I when I say local officials, I am talking about school board, so on and so forth. But you're saying that even with them who are passing down these laws, that you wouldn't necessarily consider that as child abuse.
No, Derrick, the person who was educated, and, you know, my first priority is the safety of children, right? And all people, I wouldn't consider that child abuse. But now if I turn it and flip it and put myself in that 7-year-old shoes, right? That 7-year-old probably feels like they're being abused, right? They probably feel like they're being neglected, right? To the one that sees their grandma every week, right? The grandma has pre-existing conditions. You say that to a 7-year-old, they don't know what that means. They don't get it, right? But now they feel like my grandmother is neglecting me because she's not coming to see me. She didn't even show up to my birthday party. And actually, she's on the Zoom birthday party, but I've been on Zoom with my teacher all week, and I don't even want to look at another camera. You know, I want my grandma here. So from a child's point of view, I could see how they would see it as abuse or neglect. But I don't see it that way. What I do see and what I do know is that we're in a situation that we've never been in before. So the powers that be and those who are making those administrative decisions for schools are making decisions based on research and the best decision-making model that they can to keep kids and children safe.
Amen. Amen. I'll take that. I'll take that. So, okay, kind of switching gears here. With the behavioral patterns that we're ultimately going to see with children, that we're going to see with adults in the upcoming years, for those individuals who are listening who say, I'm already starting to see those behavioral patterns that are kind of taking place in my life. I'm seeing the increased anxiety. I mean, just last week I had somebody on the podcast. We were talking about anxiety. But I'm seeing the increased cases of the behavioral of this birth from anxiety. I'm feeling this depression, this weight on me. And some people have even gone and been diagnosed as being clinically depressed or manic depression and so on and so forth. So with those individuals who are listening, I mean, and they're saying, well, I don't really see there is any hope in the future. What would you say to them? What kind of encouragement would you give to them in saying that while this is happening right now, this is not going to be forever?
Yeah. So feelings are a normal part of life. Emotions are natural right now. And sometimes we talk about anxiety and we always look at it as something that's bad. But anxiety has positives to it as well, right? My anxiety teaches me that something's wrong. I need to move from where I am, or I need to engage in something to keep myself safe. So there's a level of anxiety that is good to have. We all have it. But what I will say to the person who finds themselves in this moment struggling, I'll be transparent. I've been there, right? But when we notice those signs and we feel those things, we have to first, own it and be real with ourselves. Hey, this is persisting. This is lasting for more than X amount of days. I've been feeling down. I've been feeling this way for a while. And hey, I don't want to feel like this forever. So first, I had to push past my feelings is what I told myself. Push past my feelings and seek out help. Maybe it's not a therapist. Maybe you're not ready for that step. But we all have a friend. There's always somebody that we can call in. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there isn't somebody that you feel like you can call. But you have to find something on the inside or within to help you pull some strength from somewhere to push through it. And I know it's hard, and sometimes you don't see a light at the end of the tunnel. But I promise you that there are people out here who care, who want to help and don't want to see you in this by yourself. So I think one of the things that get us stuck is, isolation. I think isolation is sometimes our biggest enemy. We feel like we're alone, even for parents who have children who may be having these feelings and you don't know what to do. You're never by yourself. You're never experiencing something that someone else, to some extent, hasn't gone through. So you're not an anomaly, and there's hope out there, and there's people who care.
And I think that's extremely good, and I believe that that's extremely encouraging. I mean, because that's one thing that I get a lot of. I'll get people who will come back, especially this month, because I've been very vocal about my own cases of depression. I've been very vocal about my bouts of anxiety, and how for times it just kind of lingered, and also those thoughts of suicide and all those things that I felt. And then the pandemic itself, it almost like it heightened it.